Welcome to our Wellness Hub. My name is Monisi. I'm a mindset coach and I help women who feel stuck or overwhelmed in their lives by giving them actionable tools to develop lifelong positive habits. I also study and interview individuals with strong positive mindsets. One specific type is the mindset of a person who goes through numerous hardships in life and still stays strong and keeps a positive attitude. Today, we have an incredible guest. Her name is Alessandra Fabrello. Alessandra, welcome back to our channel. Thank you for being here. I know you have been through so many hardships in your life. It started when your son was diagnosed with 24 hours to live due to an incurable illness 19 years ago. What went through your mind that day? And what have you done in the past 19 years to stay sane and to keep the hope alive, to keep the positivity? The floor is yours.
Thank you, Moni. Hi, and great to be back again. Thank you for having me. Those are amazing questions. So let's dive into them. The exact moment I heard the words, "Your son has at most 24 hours to live," was a moment that is to this day inexplicable and immeasurable. My clearest thought was, he is still breathing. His heart is still beating. He is still alive. He is fighting to live. And that was my instant and immediate thought. And that thought was then followed by a decision. As long as my son was still breathing and fighting to live, I'd fight for him and with him. This was a decision that was unwavering and undeterred, and I was completely uninterested in and refused to embody his death until that moment arrived. It wasn't going to be an event until it was. So in that moment, the moment that I heard those words, "Your son has at most 24 hours to live," the world as I know it ceased to exist. It was as if life itself and the world within which I lived stopped, disappeared, and no longer existed, as though I had entered a parallel reality, a reality that exists in this solitary vacuum, is the only way I can explain it. A reality that is both numb and hypersensitized at the same time. A dual reality where both the comprehensible and the incomprehensible exist simultaneously. And in that moment, and still to this day, I can hear my thought, do not give up, do not let up. The word no is no longer in your vocabulary. This became my default over and over and over again, and became my own personal mantra for years.
And what was the diagnosis that they gave to your son?
Acute necrotizing encephalopathy of childhood.
Can you explain a little bit so that people can understand?
Absolutely. It is a process that happens to your brain that is triggered by some kind of viral or bacterial infection. It is not, as they've come to understand, necessarily the virus itself or the bacterial infection itself, but it is an unknown pathophysiology and etiology of why these very, very rare individuals react to that infection in this certain circumstance. So what happens is your brain begins to necrotize. They don't know why. They don't understand why this happens. There have been some cases where it can be attributed to a gene mutation, but my son doesn't fall into that category. So it's still a conundrum, and mortality rate is extremely high and is incurable. And if you manage to live, like my son, which he was given only 24 hours to live, but he's lived 19 years, which is still a medical conundrum.
Miracle.
Absolutely. So it is very difficult to manage. There's no treatments. He's on many different medications. They're all medications that help keep him alive, but also manage his medical condition. So he has a lot of life-threatening occurrences due to what has happened to his brain. And also he has dysautonomia. So his autonomic nervous system does not function. And it's very complex to manage. What happened to his brain at the time was he had inflammation of the brain, which then led to hemorrhaging of the brain. And due to that, necrotization, which is an enormous part of his brain was completely eaten away, necrotized, died. So there are huge pockets in his brain that aren't even there. It's just an empty space if you had to do his MRI. So there's no medical explanation for why my son is alive.
And let's go back to the mindset. Never give up. It's something inside of you. But how do you keep being positive every day? And how do you take care of your inner self? And can you step outside? Can you do some exercise? What do you do on a daily basis to stay so positive?
To be completely honest, two very important collaborative elements. One, a strategic framework for the development and design of a strategic roadmap. Two, a strategic mindset. And this is the most important, the most crucial, because without a strategic mindset, your framework, your roadmap becomes moot, because it's only in having a strategic mindset that you're able to implement and sustain your frameworks and navigate a roadmap to success. This is what I've learned over almost 20 years as a parent of a profoundly medically fragile and complex child with severe and extensive disabilities and needs. Mindset has been my foundation, and it's a complex and intricate mindset. But the first and most critical step is mastering a mindset shift. It was vital that I quickly master the ability to move from a world, a life, a future I knew to one which I knew nothing, and one that was terrifying. I had to make that shift immediately. I had to shift my perspective from a familiar and conventional to an unconventional and unknown. By circumstance, my view on the world was changed, and changed rapidly and dramatically. Without preparation, without transition, there was no training, there was no manual, and there was no time for adjustment. So when the angle of your view suddenly changes, your perception and your perspective needs to change. And this is what I discovered to be a vital piece of the puzzle. How I perceived things, how I responded to things, how I understood things, and how I defined things had to change. I could not approach my life and my context with the same mindset I had 1 second before my son was diagnosed. I needed a mindset shift, and it needed to be instant. Somehow you have to figure out how to actually do this in the midst of what feels like a full-blown hurricane unleashed onto your life. Because at the same time, every minute of every day, you're fighting to keep your child alive. And that responsibility rests on you. And the trauma and the fear and the reality that any minute of any given moment could be your child's last. But you're still having to take that precious time away from your child and having to do logistically what your child needs to live. But there's another component. There's a dual component to this. Knowing you need to make a mindset shift and knowing how to make it is one aspect. But the second is a mindset shift to what? Where do you go? Over the years, as I strategically fine-tuned and began to translate what was an unconscious competence into a conscious competence, was when it became clearer and clearer to what mindset I needed to shift and how to sustain this indefinitely. There's no sugarcoating, there's no quick, easy solution. That's the reality. It requires a consistent and relentless decision over and over again. You are constantly having to make that decision and constantly having to realign and reorient and find your way back to that mindset space.
Mm. And
Wow.
specifically, do you have any specific tips?
Specific tips in making that transition? Right. So to find your way back to that sweet spot, to that optimum mindset space, is particularly complex because it is not static, it's not one and done. And this is the greatest challenge because it requires a level of focus and commitment and awareness, and you need to be paying attention at all times. So let's talk a little bit about the mindset space that I found to be the most strategic, the most powerful, transformational, and sustainable. And what I mean by sustainable is a mindset that can withstand the assault and intensity our lives as parents of special needs children endure. And it's not about having a positive attitude. For me, having a positive attitude was futile. Being optimistic just fell grossly short of the level of depth and intensity needed. The mindset that has served me well is a disciplined and consistent commitment to the perspective that there is an alternative possibility and opportunity. It's not limitless, but that there is always an alternative. 2, there are always both possibilities and solutions available at all times. Once again, not endless, but an alternative and option. A mindset that is strategically proactive, being one step ahead, by taking the initiative to anticipate and preempt circumstances, to avoid or mitigate unnecessary outcomes or consequences. So being preemptive as opposed to reactionary, which means you eliminate losing valuable time and effort doing damage control from unnecessary or undesired outcomes. And so you need to be strategically mapping one or multiple steps ahead at all times. You need to embrace resilience. And what I mean by that is exercising and training your capacity for and your level of resilience. Reframing obstacles, barriers, or roadblocks into opportunities. And arming yourself with knowledge and more knowledge and more knowledge, but then translating that knowledge into implementable skills, focusing what is efficient and what is effective, and being highly focused on achieving results, meaning you are prioritizing result-driven outcomes. So in essence, this weave and multi-layered components became my foundational software, my mindset that determined how I am able to keep my mind sane and able to continue to function at an optimum level, but sustain it indefinitely.
Wow. And you did everything by yourself. Did you have support in this journey?
Truthfully, on my own. And we have discussed previously in a conversation that this is something that took me years to figure out. But there was a turning point. And that turning point came when I realized no one was going to help and no one knew how to help. Support groups, advocacy groups, yes, but no one teaches you and guides you in how to survive day to day and how to go beyond just surviving. I had a turning point where there was nothing left. I wasn't going to make it because there is no resource to teach you this at this level of intensity. I remember telling you a while back, I became my first client.
And so now you teach, you help people do this. What you basically give them the summary of what you did, and you hold their hand, and this is amazing. And unfortunately, Alessandra, time just flew
Again.
like this. I don't know. I wish I could have 7 hours, but you're such an inspiration to parents out there, to mothers and parents of children with special needs in very special conditions all over the world. So I really admire you, admire your strength, your inner strength, your resilience, and I hope to see you soon, because there's always so much that you can give to our audience. So Alessandra, thank you again for coming, and until next time.
Thank you.